All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Very glad you're all here today. Very excited to talk to you all. Like you said, my name is Matthew Bada. You guys can call me Matt. And the talk I'm going to give today is called Analytics for Product Success. So before I jump into some of my key points, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on me. So I currently work on the Analytics and Insights team at the e-commerce company Jet.com. Our team owns really all customer analytics at Jet, so everything from marketing analytics to app and site analytics to experimentation to user and demographic research. That all falls under our umbrella of the Analytics and Insights team. I've been at Jet.com for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was the Deputy Analytics Director on the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign down in Virginia. And before that, I worked at a startup here in the city called Dataminer, which is a real-time information company that works pretty closely with Twitter. So I'm going to cover a few key takeaways during my talk today. So just to go over those to start. The first one is defining goals up front by asking questions. The second one is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The third one is iterate, iterate, iterate. The fourth one is when too much data is worse than no data. Fifth is building a data-informed culture for the long term. And finally, becoming friends with your analysts. The theme of my talk today, I'm going to talk to you about how, as somebody who works in analytics, who spends every day working with product managers across Jet, across Walmart as well, if some of you, if you're familiar, Jet.com is owned by Walmart. I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to be an analyst, working with analytics every day to help drive and inform product decision making. So let's talk about my first point, defining goals up front by asking questions. So the importance here is about questions before metrics. Here's a bad example of that. I want to track XYZ. So I think we live in a time now where everybody wants data, everybody wants analytics, every company wants this, every organization. I'm sure you all have seen examples of that in your own worlds. Everybody wants that now. I can't tell you how many times at different organizations I've worked with, on different projects I've worked on, I've walked into meetings with people I haven't worked with before, and they come in with almost like a scroll. I want to track these 500 metrics. Okay. What's a better example? A better example for that is thinking about what are we actually trying to do? What are we actually trying to measure? Sure, we can track a ton of things, every metric under the sun. But at the end of the day, we're not just trying to build a list of metrics. What we're trying to do is answer questions. The way I like to think about this is I use the elevator example. So I like to always start with, if you're working on a project, if you're a PM, it could be if you're a UX person, a designer, an engineer, a data person, doesn't matter. You're in an elevator, maybe going from the lobby to the 5th floor with the president of the company, and they say, hey, how is your new project going? You want to start with being able to give them that quick answer. Then I say your next level of thinking about these questions are, let's say that goes well, that 30 seconds in the elevator. So they say, hey, you know what? I actually have 5 minutes. Can we continue this conversation? That can be that next level. And then it goes from there to, hey, how about you send me weekly updates? How about we build a report around this? The point I try to make here is that you want to ask the question, why are we doing this? Why are we building this product? Why are we making this change? Why are we working on this feature? Why are we spending money on this? This is mainly about product, but you can apply this to marketing campaigns. You can apply this to internal reorganization. I think at the end of the day, before we focus too much on individual metrics, we want to actually answer those questions. I can give another example of this. So when I was working on the Clinton campaign, when I first came in, obviously we're running a presidential campaign across the country, all different swing states and stuff. Tremendous amount of information about voters, about registration, all sorts of different things. It can be overwhelming, I think, to a lot of people, particularly those outside of the analytics umbrella. So what I try to get the team I was working with to focus on is putting that aside and just saying, what are the first questions we want our team to be able to answer every day? What is the information we want to be able to give people? When we ask those questions up front and set those goals, it makes it a lot easier to come up with the metrics. That way, it's not just metrics for the sake of metrics, it's we're using those metrics to answer the questions that we have. My second point, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So this is a point around, particularly when you're launching new products and you want to be able to track things coming out of the gate, right? So here's a bad example. Maybe we can try a different font. This is an example from a project I worked on a few years ago. where we were going to be launching this new feature. We wanted to have a report ready to go. When it launched, we wanted to be able to report out, is this product working, is it not working? And I happened to be working with someone who was very hung up on what the report was going to look like. What was the font going to be? What was it going to look like? Who exactly was going to be on the email thread? A better example is really just making sure, going back to my point about asking questions, once we know what those questions are, what are those high-level metrics day one we want to track? In a perfect world, and in my perfect world, as somebody who works with data every day, I'd love to see everything tracked from day one. I'd like to see things ready to go. When we launch a product, when we launch a new feature, I want that tracking there. I work in data, that's what I want to see. The reality is that is not always possible, right? A lot of us work at, or maybe would like to work at, places that are moving quickly, trying to build a lot of things. Sometimes things get pushed when they're not fully ready. Sometimes things get pushed without fully tracking things. I would make the argument that that is not always the worst thing. Sometimes we just need things to happen. That's just the nature of pushing things out and building products. So what we want to be able to do is really focus on what are those key questions we want to answer and what are those high-level metrics we need to answer those questions on day one. There's always time to look into more things and dive deeper, but I think even if you have that time, doing this exercise is helpful because it really helps conceptualize what are the most important things we care about, right? There's tons of questions we're going to want to answer, but there are certainly ones that are more important than others. So the way we think about this is just, what do I need to know first? Ask yourself, if you were coming in the morning and you were trying to figure out how is this product doing, how is this feature doing, how is this launch going, what is the first thing I need to know? I'm sure that list gets big quickly, but use your gut. What's the first thing you want to know? That's why we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. My third point, iterate, iterate, iterate. Third point, 3 times, sort of figure little symmetry there. So this is about learning what does and does not work. So we just talked about how we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We want to make sure that when we're starting out, we don't hesitate, we don't pause if we have to push things, we just focus on what's important. The next step though is then iterating on that. So a bad example I have seen at places I've worked, I've talked to other people who work in analytics and other companies. I see this all the time, and it really is heartbreaking for me to see, is when teams publish analysis and then never look at it again. We launch this feature, we have tracking on it, we look at it for a week or two, it works, it's good, great, let's move on to the next thing. We have another feature to build. Fine. But if we're not going back, if we're not constantly looking at not only the numbers we're getting and how things seem to be performing, but even thinking about what are we measuring? Are we definitely measuring the right things? Are those questions we came up with and those metrics we use to answer those questions the right ones? I can tell you in my experience, that is not always the case. We always start out thinking that people are going to use our app or our site or a product feature in a certain way, and sometimes they don't. They use it in a different way. So maybe if they're using something in a different way, we need to rethink how we're going to measure what is going on with the products. So I work for Jet.com. We're an e-commerce company. We sell all sorts of different products, everything from groceries to fashion to beauty products to toiletries, pretty much everything you can think of under the sun. Something we really learned over time, especially while I've been there, is that, perhaps intuitive to some, people really do shop differently across some of those categories. There are certain things that hold true across the board, but something we've learned over time is really that it's the online version of the real world example of you're running into a store for this one very specific thing you need versus you're strolling into a store and browsing through the aisles to look around, right? As we build features, as we build products, and we see those sorts of behaviors emerge, as we better understand what our customers are doing, we need to be able to iterate our analysis. We need to be able to answer new questions, ask and answer new questions. We need to look at new metrics. So what's a better example of that? A regular cadence of updates. I will tell you, in my experience, the best relationships I have had with folks working in product organizations at the places I've worked have been the relationships where we meet regularly at a scheduled time. The reason for this is that way we're never going too long without touching base, checking in on how things are going, understanding what we're looking at, what they're thinking about upcoming. That iteration, that process of constantly revisiting that, first of all, if things are going wrong, it allows us to usually pick up on things in a faster way. But it also lets us constantly think about, are we definitely answering the right questions? So I think collecting feedback and reassessing over time is a really good way to do this. And collecting feedback, I think, is really important. Something I like to ask the product managers I work with, let's say we're going to launch a new feature, I'll meet with them, we'll figure out those questions up front, we'll figure out what the metrics are that we're going to use to answer those questions, and then we'll set up our products, we'll set up our dashboards, reports, do whatever analytical work we need, we'll launch the feature, we'll monitor it. I like to go back to them and say, what is a question you want to answer right now that you can't with what we did? What is a question you're trying to answer that the metrics we're tracking or the way we're tracking things doesn't allow you to answer? And I think constantly having that conversation and getting that feedback is a really good way to not only better track individual products over time, but just generally think about within your team, within your organization, within your work stream, what are the types of questions you want to answer? And I think the longer you're with a particular set of employees or at a particular organization, this really allows you to grow over time and better anticipate up front what sorts of questions people are going to want to have answered. So my next point is when too much data is worse than no data. So as I mentioned before, I think we're now really into a time where people want data, people want analytics. It's a really hot topic. Every company in the world right now is like, we need analytics, we need data. This is great. I work in analytics. I love this. It's really great if you're looking for a new job. But I think a big thing is that too much data can lead to paralysis. Some people call it analysis paralysis, paralysis by analysis. I'm just going to say too much data can lead to paralysis. The reason is this. I use this example because there was a place I worked where we were going to make a summary report. I was working with a new product team. The lead on this team was like, I want to have a summary report. So we tried to talk about some questions, but this manager was very much like, well, I want to be able to answer this and this and this and this. And it was a new relationship, so I'm a big believer in, you want to sort of defer to people initially, get a sense of what they want. But by the time this planning and conversation was over and I went away and did my work, this summary report was 5 pages long. So I delivered it to this person and I said, what do you think? They said, I'm going to look at this, I'll get back to you. They came back to me and said, I have no idea what to do with this. I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from this. What am I supposed to understand from this? A better example, I think, is really making sure, again, and this works a lot easier if you ask those questions up front, like I said in my first point. When you ask those questions up front, you can get a better sense of what are those top-line metrics I need? What are those single most important questions I need to ask? I say this to people even in my job at Jet now. We support a lot of teams outside of just product, so we work a lot with the retail organization. I'm constantly meeting with new people through Jet and Walmart. And people come in and they mean well. They want all the information. They're like, I need this metric, I've read about this metric and this metric. And I'm like, okay, but if I gave that all to you, what are you going to do with it? What is the action item? What is the next step? I do believe that context information can serve a useful purpose, right? It gives us a sense of what's going on. It helps us level set sort of what's going on with the business, what's going on with the product. But at the end of the day, I think for most people, if you give them too much information, they're not able to act on it. That's why I'm a big believer in really focusing that information on what our audience needs to know. We can always give them more, but if we start with what are the most important things they need to know to drive action, we can make it easier for them to move. I think the best example of this, which doesn't actually work, but I always love this quote, somebody I used to work with who was running this huge operational organization, we needed to make a report. She said to me, you know what would be my perfect report? I would just love to come in every morning and see a thumbs up or a thumbs down that lets me know, are we good or not? And I always loved that line because while obviously that's probably a little bit too simple, I think it does get at the point that while a lot of people want data or say they want data, I think what they really want is information that they can use to confidently make decisions. That's what they want more than data. So I always say keep that in mind. So my next point, building a data-informed culture for the long term. So before I get into my points, I actually want to really emphasize that phrase data-informed as opposed to data-centric or data-driven. The reason for this is that I don't love those terms because I think it implies that data should be the only thing driving your decision making, which, while perhaps at a personal and professional level sounds kind of good to me, I don't think realistically that's how you should be driving product making decisions, how you should be driving business decisions. I think data should inform your decision making. So everyone is going to bring a lot of stuff to the table besides just the data we're collecting, right? There is value, I think, in domain experience, right? Working in particular industries, understanding particular client bases, knowing what's worked in the past, leaning on people who've had experience, who've been down that road before. I don't think you want either of these to solely drive the ship, but that's why I like to say data informed. The data is going to inform our decision making. It's going to tell us if our past experiences and some of the anecdotes we have make sense. It's going to help at least ground us in the ballpark of what we should be looking at and what we should be doing. So we don't want the data to drive everything because we don't want it to be the sole driver. We want it to inform our decision making. So if we're doing that and we're building this data-informed culture, at the end of the day, at most of the places I've worked and most of the places I've seen, the reality also is that there are not as many people working in analytics or who have that skill set or that openness to using the tools to adequately answer everyone's questions, which is why I say it's a finite resource. So a bad example I like to use is this quote, "I don't know, is this good?" That's somebody coming to you and just saying like, is this thing working? I don't know. I have no idea where to start. A big thing we try to do at Jet, and we've done at other places I've worked, is we're big believers in preaching that idea of data-informed culture, but then also letting people buy into that. So everywhere I've worked, and this is something I really enjoy doing at work, although it's not part of my main job, we teach internal classes. We like to teach people how to use the tools that our analytics and insights team is using. We like to teach people even just like, if they're not, you know what, we have a team of salespeople. I used to work at a B2B firm. Hey, let's talk to you guys about how to use Excel or how to better understand your sales data. Let's talk about the analytics tools we're using. I think by telling people that we're data informed, it makes them more comfortable because it shows I want you to better understand the data. I want you to feel more comfortable working with it, but I don't want you to think I'm saying that we are the sole drivers of everything or that we are the right answer by ourselves. I think by getting people to buy into that culture, you can have people getting more and more comfortable with this information, working with analytics, and using that to help inform their decision-making process. So again, training I think is a big thing. I also am a big believer in knowledge sharing, and knowledge sharing in the sense of not just doing analysis and getting it out there, although that's absolutely a good first step. I think the other thing is constantly being aware of your audience and what familiarity they have with analytics or with the type of work you've done. So I'm a big believer in, I don't want to use the term oversimplifying things, but I like to say putting things in a more like normal business focused language. So making people feel more comfortable working with analytics and understanding how that can help inform their decision making. You could come up with the most brilliant concept in the world. This applies to analytics, product, anything else. But if you can't explain it to people and get people to buy into those ideas and use them in their processes, it's useless. One of my managers I had in the past used to say that something really cool and interesting you do that no one can understand or read is a hobby. It's not a job, right? So that's cool to do on your own time, but I think if you really want to help drive your business, drive your organization, you need to make sure you're building that culture so people can buy in and understand. So finally, my final point here, becoming friends with your analysts. So I like to talk about this because a lot of you either work in product or are going to work in product one day, and this is my little pitch on how to have a good relationship with your analysts. I think some of the people who work with analytics teams sometimes think we have magic wands, that we just pull stuff out of thin air really quickly, and that is not the case, right? I think this is something we can all apply to in workplaces, but I think really bringing analytics into the product roadmap and the product delivery system earlier is a really big thing. So jokes about, late night emails for the next morning aside, I think something that we do really well at Jet and that I've been lucky enough to see at other organizations is we've built this culture of involving analytics from the beginning. So I am not a product manager, but I work with them all day. I am in those product kickoff meetings. Even before we're having discussions about analytics or about metrics, I'm there in those early ideation stages with the UX designers, with engineers, with the PMs. That way I know from the beginning what's the thought process, where was this idea coming from, what drove this decision initially. Was it just an idea someone had? Was it around a key business objective? What was driving that? By bringing people in from analytics earlier, it makes it much easier for us to then help you answer those questions and come up with those metrics, because we have a better holistic understanding of what is going on. It builds better relationships, and I think it builds better teams. So that collaboration, I think can't be overstated, right? So even if it means something I've done is, while I work with my analytics team, I have a desk where all the PMs sit, so I like to go sit over there, just work with them, think through as they're in those early stages, and I think that's a really big, huge thing you can do. So those are my main 6 points, but I wanted to make sure I left a bunch of time for questions. So I'd love to hear any questions you guys might have. Yes?
I was curious, in your organization, who actually uses the data to make business decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a big mix of people, right? So our PMs use a lot of this data to think about what product features they want to really spend their time on, first of all, right? So understanding like, where are our customer pain points? Where are the things that are causing roadblocks? Or what are the things that are doing well, that are delighting customers, that are moving them through the shopping funnel? So I think that's part of it, right? Just prioritization. Another thing I think is starting to understand how people are using your site, how people are browsing your site and looking for different products. I think that really allows them to do that. Outside of that, you have management, right? Looking at it a bit more of a higher level, right? Just understanding how the business as a whole is doing. Something else that we've done a big thing with Jet is really getting analytics involved in the UX and design process as well. A lot of our designers have really bought into this idea of they want to know when they build a creative asset, when they put something new on the site, they're spending a lot of time designing, having photo shoots, different things. They love to hear like, what are people clicking on? What's driving cart ads? What's driving conversions? So I think the answer is, hopefully in a perfect world, is really everyone. And that's something we've really tried to push forward to help people understand we're not just there to like judge your work, we're there to help you work better. And that's that data-informed culture I like to talk about. Yes?
What are some like resources out there, like if you were to Google data on something, like, I don't know, public free resources that you use?
Yeah, I think, there's places like Product School, there's a lot of online free classes. I think depending on, a lot of it is tool or like language dependent, right? So depending on what exactly you want to learn and do. I would say a big thing I like to do is like listening to talks and hearing what other people who are already doing.
Like city data, like data on the city. Like, is there
just looking for, okay, gotcha, yeah.
Looking for data.
Yeah, fair question. So I think it's a little disjointed, but for example, using the city data thing, New York City actually does a pretty good job of releasing open source data. There's some pretty cool stuff out there you can get. The unfortunate thing with some of the public data is it tends to be rather fragmented among like different agencies and organizations. But I think if you kind of look around, a lot of places are trying to get better about that. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, so you do a lot of analytics. What's the relationship with like user research, like interviews and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So as I mentioned before, I'm on the analytics and insights team at Jet, and we actually moved our user research group into the analytics and insights umbrella. That's why we call ourselves the analytics and insights team, as opposed to just the analytics team. I've actually never worked a place before where those teams were integrated, and having now been through that, I would recommend to any organization doing that. So our team is a little bit bigger and sort of has squads underneath it, but by unifying that, I mean the fact that we all sit together, we all have meetings together, we all talk more, has really helped streamline and connect a lot of that information, right? Because now we're marrying that like site and app data, that experimentation data, with user interviews, user testing, field data, demographic research. So I think that's absolutely a huge part of the equation as well. And I know that's something, I don't know if you guys, how much you guys have seen about jet.com or followed, but we have a ton of ads in the city over the last few months, like starting last fall. And we've really focused on, especially New York City, with a lot of our delivery stuff. And a lot of that was driven not just by on-site stuff, but things like user interviews, research, stuff like that. I think that's absolutely a huge part of the process too. Something we try to do at Jet is anytime I'm going to have a meeting with like a lead PM who owns like a big chunk of the business, is we always like to have not only someone like myself or from our team, but we always actually try to bring someone from our research team as well to be there so that they can weigh in. Another thing I would add as a side note that we do at Jet, which I think is great, we also have brought some behavioral economists onto our team, which is really fun and helpful too in that whole process.
What's a behavioral economist?
These are people who really do like the science and economics of decision making and incentives and things like that. So understanding different concepts about how people make decisions, how they think about like rewards versus deterrence, but really study it in like a rigorous scientific way. Some really cool stuff out there. You can read about behavioral economics and like e-commerce and retail. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, my name is Peter Schauer. I'm professional services for a company called CDI Security. We're a cybersecurity services company. I mentioned that because I'm hiring. Everybody else here. I want to actually help you with one question, which is where you get data. It depends on the kind of data you want to play with. Cybersecurity data is like, it's a mess. It's a soup sandwich. It comes in all shapes and colors, right? So what I usually recommend is find batches of text you can play with and count stuff. Xfiles.com. The complete works of William Shakespeare is available for free in text. And you can do stuff like look for the number of instances of being in that. The other thing I want to ask you about is the definition of data. As you mentioned, you kind of touched on the like expert judgment and things that are not precise.
Sure.
And yet are data. And like a lot of what I deal with is I kind of feel secure, I kind of feel don't, I sort of like this vendor, I sort of don't, I'm not sure, reds, greens, and yellows, that kind of stuff. And I wonder, like in your game, it sounds like, in looking at your business, there's not a lot of blurriness, not a lot of grays, but I mean, what are some instances where you've had to work with kind of ordinal or fuzzier sorts of stuff?
Absolutely. So at Jet, right, and this is, I think we're having like research teams that can do user interviews, user testing and stuff like that can really come into play. So we can look at our site and app data and generally follow like user paths through the site, what actions are being taken, but it's something that's still tough to sort of glean out of that a lot of times is intent. Some of it's easier than others, right? So people coming in via very specific marketing campaigns or taking actions like search that are very pinpointed, right? You can pretty easily see like, okay, this person is looking for groceries. This person is looking for this one very specific toothpaste, for example, right? But on a lot more of these browse type behaviors where you have people bouncing around and looking at different things, it can be a lot harder to sometimes figure out what exactly people are doing. Sometimes, honestly, I think it's because people aren't sure what they're looking for, right? So I think that's where sometimes looking at the data, we can't quite figure out these different user patterns of behavior. That's why we're big on doing user testing and research. So we actually have a whole lab at Jet where we bring people in and have them shop on the site and ask them questions and ask them, how would you look for this? How would you find this? And that really helps, I think, fill in some of those gaps that over time we can better understand what we're seeing in the data. So that's one example I would use. Yes?
When you analyze the data, which department you communicate more except data analytics, like supply chain, product management, or user research?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my particular case, we actually have a separate supply chain analytics team. So I just personally happen to not do much with supply chain. I'm focused more on on-site and customer experience data. But we primarily work with the product managers, I would say would be our biggest audience. Another big part of our audience is the marketing organization in general, because they're interested in a lot of that, what's going on site in terms of just bringing people into the site. I would say another big one is, and this is a little bit specific to our e-commerce site, is we have a huge retail organization as well that's responsible for getting all those products on the site, you know, managing them, curating them, doing the merchandising. They're obviously a big audience too. They want to understand site behavior, what sort of patterns we're seeing to help figure out how to do that. So it really is pretty varied. I can just say in my personal experience, since I tend to primarily work with product, that's usually my biggest audience.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yes.
Love the fact that you guys are doing quantum qual data together.
Yes, thank you.
And a product manager, you often think in sprints with also your engineers. So for you, in an ideal situation, I know that you mentioned you should bring in the quantum qual guys early, but what would a sprint look like for you? And then how does that manifest into like a full-blown experiment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So we actually decided on our team about maybe 5 or 6 months ago to actually just lock into cadence with the product and engineering sprints. So we do the exact same start and end dates of sprints with them. Our world's a little different, right? There's always going to be questions that come up, especially this time of year, the last few months. That's our busiest time of year, right? The holidays, people buy a lot more stuff online, right? So there's always going to be things that come up, things that are coming from leadership and other departments to understand. So it's not, in my experience, it has not been a perfect model, frankly, because a lot of our sprints end up getting broken sometimes. But I think in general, the reason we did that was so, since our sprints were aligned, when they were kicking off things, we were usually at the starts of sprints as well, or planning for new ones. So I think it allowed us to even more seamlessly align with them. We also just synced a lot of our meetings so that when they're going to be kicking things off, we're also kicking things off, so we can sort of be in sync.
Are you like one sprint ahead though, or something like that, because you might be involved in design?
Yeah, so we don't have like a perfect system yet, frankly, but it just tends to be we'll have some projects, excuse me, that tend to carry over more between sprints. But so far, I think in general, my experience has been that it's been a good move. If for no other reason, then it just sort of syncs everyone on similar timelines. That way, it's an easier argument to make like, well, we're all going to have a sprint kickoff meeting. Great, let's just all be there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.